Hi, my name is Paula Noe, and you're at EduSmart STAAR Prep Workshop. Let's get started. So before we go to any STAAR Prep Workshop, or we even talk about STAAR, you've got to go to Vegas, right? You got to know the numbers. And so in order to know the numbers, our go-to resource is always the free resource at leadforward.com. So leadforward.com puts the readiness and supporting standards for every subject at every tested grade level in a very simplistic form. It breaks it down to readiness, supporting, and process. And then it also gives us this handy dandy document called the frequency distribution chart. Now, let's spend a little bit of time with this. On the frequency distribution chart, it makes complete sense that you would spend the bulk of your time reviewing either A, what you haven't taught, or you didn't teach very well at all, or primarily B, because you've probably taught everything and you need to focus on the things that are most heavily tested. Makes complete sense, right? So let's look at this document a little more carefully. All the standards are broken down into clusters and subclusters. So the clusters are pretty much like big reporting categories, and the subclusters are very specific breakouts from those clusters. So the reporting category might be matter and energy. A cluster might be physical properties of matter. A subcluster would be physical properties of matter, changes of matter, and mixtures. I want you to pay careful attention to the frequency. Now let's look at the years. So on this particular document, it's got data for 4 years. Pay careful attention to that column 2021. You can tell how many times out of 36 questions this particular TEK was tested. And I'm going to look down here at one of your money TEKs and your money subclusters. And I call it money because it was tested 5 times out of 36. And it's over the subcluster interaction of ecosystems with these TEKs, 5.9a in specifically. So 5 times out of 36. And if you notice, the bottom of this chart is really heavy. 12 times out of 36 questions come from life science. So pay careful attention to this document as you formulate your own campus review plan. Next, let's talk about what I would consider a data responsive instruction plan. Number one, making sure that you drill down using a variety of DOK levels, but always starting with a 4. Because remember, this is review. This is not actual teach. So they've already been exposed to DOK levels of 1, 2, and 3, and a few 4. But let's hit them with the 4, and then we need to scaffold support up to that level of question or push the rigor even higher by applying that kind of question, a DOK level of 4, to an unknown situation. Number 2, better is always better. Anytime we can add a visual or a chart or make the question open-ended so the students have to show where they're going to start their thinking on the question, that's always better. Number 3, I said to norm with a level 4 question. I think I went over that pretty thoroughly. Number 4, keep all content live. For instance, if there is a change of state in a water cycle question or in a slow change question, then I would go over the states of water and changing states of matter. And I would keep everything in real time. So use all the stimulus in the question to review your content as well. See it as a very practical opportunity. And then number 5, every space on campus becomes a science space. So as you transition from your classroom to lunch, your classroom to specials, make sure that you've got a just right question right above the door as you exit out. Maybe it's something simple like order of the planets. We just need to practice counting from the sun and comparing like what is before this planet, what comes after this planet, maybe some simple characteristics of the planets. Maybe it's simple characteristics of sun, earth, moon, and they just simply need to card sort it. Maybe it's figuring out, is this question a weather question or is it a climate question? So there's a lot of TEKS that are tested once or sometimes not tested at all that we can do in a simple review as we are transitioning about our day. So don't forget about every space is a science space. Next, let's talk about the plan inside of a class period. Now, this particular plan I'm suggesting is a 10-day plan. Many campuses have 3 weeks to prep for STAAR, so your plan would be for 3 weeks, but this particular one is for 10 days. So day one, I would go over matter properties and I would fine tune my students' skill on reading and interpreting charts, dealing with physical properties of matter. Day two, I would focus on mixtures and solutions. Day three, I would quickly focus on forms of energy, melts, mechanical, electrical, light, thermal, sound, and I would spend time on circuits in another place. So just keep that in the back of your mind. The majority of time on day three would be spent on life, refraction, reflection, and absorbing or blocking. Day four, Earth, most of the time spent on slow changes to the Earth, with just a little bit of time comparing and contrasting, is this a rapid change or slow change? Day five, steps to form a sedimentary rock. And that follows day four because you've already done weathering, erosion, deposition. The first 3 steps, sedimentary rock, would include compaction and cementation. And then you would definitely ask questions regarding fossil fuels, renewable and non-renewable resources while you're there, as well as fossils. So day 6, rotation, day-night models, shadow models, and interpreting shadow patterns. It's a very heavy day. Day 7, here comes a lot of your questions. So day 7 and 8 focus on relationships inside of ecosystems. So living to living and living to non. Day 7 and 8, critical. So day 8 is being able to read food chains and food webs and interpret them. And then day 9 goes into life adaptations with inherited traits and learned behaviors. Day 10 is kind of a catch-all day for all things life that you need to spend a little bit more time on. So that is a plan suggested for 10 days. So let's go into what it could look like as I partner with EduSmart to help support me during this time. Well, any teacher can use EduSmart to level up their game. I personally use EduSmart during review time for their rich visual literacy. So as I'm reviewing a concept, I have the just right images pulled up from EduSmart by hitting the pause button during the instructional module or student review, or perhaps during the interactivities or lab simulations. These visuals are amazing and they're always tied to the key vocabulary and they're completely aligned to the depth and complexity of the concept. And so if I was teaching about slow change to the earth and erosion from water, this would be towards the end of the story. I would have this slide up and I would ask a myriad of questions to my students. Tell me what part of slow change I'm witnessing here with this image. So hopefully your students will say deposition. What is the step right before deposition? How did these sediments get here? Well, hopefully they'll say they were eroded by water. So what was the first step? Weathering, then erosion, then deposition is happening now. Tell me what's happening to these pieces of sediment. Hopefully they would say that they are falling or dropping through the water and settling down on the bottom of the riverbed. And then I'm going to ask, what key physical property is causing this to happen? I would tie it all the way back to physical properties of matter and density. So hopefully my students would get that things that are more dense than water will fall to the bottom or sink or settle out. And this is also going to be building up, creating new land. So that's one way I would use it as a teacher in front of whole group or even small group. But another very specific way would be to create a playlist. This would be a very data responsive way to use EduSmart at this time. So you have been gaining data all throughout the year on these kiddos. And so now how are you going to customize it for each child's success? So maybe you're grouping them in small group, or maybe this is an individualized learning plan that you're creating for this student to shore up their data. You might use this playlist right before they come to you in small group, or you might use it just simply as a small group station. Either way, it's just one of the many reasons I love EduSmart, because it's agile, it's flexible, I can use it in real time, I can form a playlist to be responsive to my scholars. It's one of the best products out there that's completely aligned to the standards. Next, let's talk about what a class period could look like. And for a 60-minute class period, this is just a rough estimate of time, I would launch with a hook or some sort of visual support with literacy for a quick 5 minutes, incorporating a visual piece and a problem of the day. Then I would go into a vocabulary practice, whether it's my EduSmart Word Explorer or whether it's a simple visual literacy challenge showing images tying key concepts. And then I would go into a core review, and then I would supplement that with 2D practice of 30 minutes using the STAAR Smart products if you own them. And if you don't, then you'll need to pull some different assessment products or simply use the STAAR release questions at this time. So if you own STAAR Smart, you would definitely want to use them here. So know that inside of your STAAR Smart subscription, you have 2 STAAR Smart release tests that are STAAR linked that you can use at this time. You also have 4 reporting category tests of 20 questions, and then you have a unit test for every single TEK, up to 5 questions. So please make sure that you take full advantage of that in your data responsive plan. So now let's just briefly run through some images and how I would use vocabulary, visual literacy, questioning, or maybe different strategies as I teach some of the different concepts. So I know this piece of the training is going to go rather quickly, but know that you can come back and access these images at any time and use them in your own practice. Vocabulary. Make sure that it's direct, explicit practice. Make sure that you use visuals. Make sure that all words always stay alive and that you look to make connections. For instance, if we're talking about reflection, we're going to be talking about light, right? And how light bounces off of a shiny surface. And so when I say bounce, I would say reflection. And I know those 2 words are tied to light for me. So here's a quick example of a game I play called Frame It and Name It. So I might put this image up. So the kids would probably say, hey, this is an earth science question or a light energy question. Obviously, this picture is focusing on the mountain's reflection on the shiny surface of the water. So to frame it, they would say light, and to name it, they would say reflection. Next, what is your routine going to be? Make sure that you establish some sort of a vocabulary practice routine. Here's a fun one called Mile a Minute. You simply put some keywords up. You have 2 different categories. One partner has its back to the screen. The other partner is facing the screen. And I'm trying to get my partner to name that key vocabulary word by giving clues about it. So for instance, if I'm giving the clues for delta, I might say triangular shaped landform at the mouth of a river. A delta is formed from deposition, much like a sand dune. So I might say all of these words trying to get my partner to say delta. Once my partner has said delta, we would move on to the next word. Once we get all 5 of these words in, we would be the winner, and then we would switch and give the other partner a turn. Mile a minute. Next, you might use Google Image to drive picture support and vocab development. So I just picked a random 6 images up here. And so quickly, my students are going to try to whiteboard what the answers are to these questions. Always one of my favorites, EduSmart's Word Explorer. I pulled up one right here. It's over changes of the Earth's surface. You can see that there are 7 key vocabulary words we're focusing on. So once you click on each of these images, it's going to turn over and give you a definition. And then also it would give you some word vocabulary practice that's very interactive. I like to practice circuit questions, and I like to practice them as brain breaks. So all throughout my day, whether it's an ELA lesson, a math lesson, a social studies lesson, or during a random part of our day, we are going to have a quick circuit practice challenge. So I would just simply put these circuit questions up and then ask high-level questions and have my scholars answer them. For instance, how many devices are on in this circuit question? What happens when I close switch number 3? How many devices are on now? What's the only way to get 3 devices on that include yellow, blue, and the buzzer? All good questions and very good rigorous practice. Next, let's go into anchors. How does your anchor or visual literacy look different than when you made it for First Teach? Here's some examples. First Teach might have looked at the bottom, but obviously as we move throughout the year, the anchor needs to look different because we have a different level of conceptual knowledge. Same thing for conductors. Do your students know that good conductors are very bad insulators and good insulators are very bad conductors? It's a fun way to practice vocabulary when you tie it to these keywords. Also, here's an image off of EduSmart, weathering, erosion, deposition. Which one is it? Let's have a quick turn and talk in a discussion, or let's try to convince our partner of which one we believe this picture is really depicting. The fun thing about this particular way to ask a question is that all 3 can be right if the student answers it correctly. Matter, major concepts in matter. Make sure you overemphasize physical properties chart. Mixtures maintain physical properties. Separating solution is going to incorporate steps and equipment, and state changes are going to include heating and cooling of water. The matter TEKS overly focus on identifying and sorting based on property and spend the majority of your time working on density, magnetism, state, conductor, insulator, thermal and electrical, and solubility. Always ask your matter questions in a chart, and then ask the overall question, can I sort matter based on this property? Here's another key practice question. Practice, practice, practice. Practice with one unknown word each time. And I would always put a word in front of the kids that I felt like they didn't know and say, which category would this word go best with? And then I might actually have a demonstration and then see if they could sort this unknown based on its physical properties. Tell the story. Tell the story of the image. Sort the words using the following physical properties: density, conductors, and magnetic objects. Next, conductor and insulator questions. Make sure you know the keyword connections. Good and bad, which is a play on words. Electrical and thermal. Make sure you focus on thermal. What are the pieces of equipment and pictures that would represent? Thermometer, circuit, styrofoam, cardboard, maybe a Yeti cup, Starbucks cup with a cardboard sleeve, water in a jar, refrigerator, a cooler, clothing, pockets of air trapped by feathers for birds. As we move forward, physical properties, including mixtures and solutions, an excellent interactivity lab simulation inside of EduSmart. Highly recommend you do this one. And then making sure that we get closure 3D to 2D. This is actually the data table from that EduSmart piece over solubility. Does it dissolve? Does it not? And you notice that EduSmart takes it another level up by talking about the particle size, which leads me into some harder issues with mixtures and solutions. We've got to make sure our kids understand the verbs inside the questions. So here's an example of a game I created called Name It and Work the Box. Here's a very difficult chart that's used in a question. How do we get our kids to understand how to identify whether something is a solution when it's in a story chart or a story problem? Well, the way you do it is you always pay attention to what happens after we stop stirring. We look for verbs. Did it settle? Is it clear and invisible? Is it collecting? Is it forming? All those verbs give us clues that those are either mixtures or a solution. And then great visuals again from EduSmart showing the particles reduce in size. A simple challenge question could go along with this EduSmart visual on is this a mixture and solution? And then how can I easily sort this mixture? Another particle size visual I captured for you. And I'm just going to click through some of these right now. Very, very hard question visual, but very easy to teach once you use EduSmart on how this solution is evenly distributed. More great visuals from EduSmart as you teach this concept. And then another quick practice over circuits. So once we get to light, what's name is it? How does it travel? What are the three ways light behaves? What is a medium? What mediums can I expect to see? And then definitely the difference between refraction and reflection with some other key pieces of visuals that you can use. Always making sure that you focus on refraction and reflection. And then a quick, interesting circuit questions you can pop in there. Then some quick experiments, always good to throw in, knowing that you're going to get one experiment question and then one question over force. So the experiment questions, always good to frame it this way. What is a good title for the experiment? What variable am I being tested over? What variable am I measuring? And then what increment or tool am I using to measure it in? And then some good examples here. Making sure that you always reinforce being a good storyteller of images when it comes to visuals. Space. A quick little freebie here. Here's an interactivity you can do with your kids. Put these images up and simply ask them, are these images of constructing models or identifying planets? Are these images of analyzing patterns? Or are these images of demonstrating day and night? So this is a great activity that lends to a lot of table talk and a lot of comparing and contrasting and being good critical consumers of our visual literacy pieces. All good activities for you to use. And then I follow up this activity with a quick four corners activity using these visuals. I want you to tell me the story of the image using these four key vocabulary words, which incorporate tier 1 and tier 2 words. And you know that a lot of our students don't struggle with the science content words. They sometimes struggle with the tier 2 words, such as farthest or shortest or source. Some more good visual literacy pieces. A very challenging piece here. In this image that I captured from EduSmart, I simply added the letters A, B, C, D. So I'll ask you this. What letter represents sunrise? When I do this in teacher trainings, I usually get 50% of the teachers get this wrong. So I've given you a little bit of think time. So if you know the story of what it looks like outside, you can answer this question. So sunrise is when the atmosphere goes from dark to light outside for us. So which image is dark to light? Well, C would be noon. Dark to light would be the letter A. Okay, would be the complete answer. Another image overshadows. Now we have earth science. Some key standards here, making sure that you scaffold that support in for your scholars and that you're talking about complete weathering, erosion, and deposition, and identifying landforms from rapid and slow changes, but also as a result of erosion and deposition, tying in some key student work, and then always throwing in that circuit practice. So as we wrap up with life science, I've added some key things for you to focus on, making sure that you identify and describe energy flowing through food chains and webs, using some high-level pictures from EduSmart. How would I interact with this easy food web? I would simply put an X on one of these organisms, and I would say, how is this food web um, impacted? And before you do the food web, you give them 3 food chain. They have to create the food web, and then you can ask that high-level question. What would happen at the disappearance of the coyote, and how would it impact these organisms? And then I'll finish up here quickly with a 3-part free activity that you can use. And you challenge kids to identify how many food chains are represented, identify and assign an organism in this food web to its appropriate role, and then describe how energy moves through this food web, always starting with the sun, and then use these words inside the word bank to give me a quick write. So remember, life happens 12 times inside of a 36 question test. That's a lot. I'd always focus on birds before I finish my review with their feet and their beaks. And I would make sure that I'm thinking it through. Anytime I put a question in front of kids, that I identify what kind of problem is it. Well, this is a word problem, but it's got a graphic and a chart. And I model to students how to interact with these kids. I model to students how to interact with these questions. So always taking into account error patterns. Are we clueless? Are we confused? Or are we confident? Clueless means is that all the answer choices your class gave you, there's no clean winner. They're just all wrong. Confused means is that there's 2. Half of the class got it right, and half of the class picked revolution instead of rotation. Confident means is that 80% of your class got it right, but there's some stragglers. So making sure that you're looking at the data, and the item analysis is always super helpful when you have your EduSmart products to look at that with. Lastly, I want to thank you so much for allowing me to be here, and I want to show you 2 last things. I want to show you what a group assessment report would look like and where your item analysis would be found. So under here, you notice that under the group assessment report inside of EduSmart, you have the tabs quiz, unit test, reporting category, and STAAR practice. If you own STAAR Smart, you'll have the last 3 categories as well. And you can always pull up an item analysis on your assessment pieces inside of EduSmart. And then it will simply give you the breakdown with the answer choices broken out with a asterisk by the correct answer. So I hope you've enjoyed this time with me and EduSmart STAAR Prep Workshop. Thank you so much, and I wish you all the best.